The Essential Bible, Encountering the Heart of the Living God, Day 5. The slide shows what we've covered in the story so far. Last time we looked at the first part of Moses, his birth and calling by God at the burning bush. And today we'll cover the second part of the story of Moses, the Exodus, where God rescues his people from slavery, and the creation of the sacrificial system for atonement of sins. We heard last time how God knew that Pharaoh would not let God's people go unless he was forced to do so. To force him to do so, God sent 10 plagues on Egypt. And we pick up the story today in chapter 12 of Exodus, after the first 9 plagues have been and gone, but Pharaoh still wouldn't let the Israelites leave Egypt. And so we come now to the story of the first Passover and the 10th plague. Later on, God said to Moses and Aaron, while the Israelites were still in the land of Egypt, "This is to be the first month of the year for you, and on the 10th day of this month each man should take a lamb to sacrifice for his household. They should take special care of these lambs until the 14th day of this month. The whole community must slaughter their lambs at the same time in the evening on that day. Then they must smear some of the lamb's blood on the sides and tops of the doorframes of each house where the lambs are eaten. That same night, everyone must roast their lamb over a fire and then eat it with bitter herbs along with bread made without yeast. As you eat this meal, be prepared to leave in a hurry. Wear your outdoor clothes with your cloak tucked in your belt and your sandals on. Have your walking sticks close to hand. Eat the meal quickly, for it is the Passover of God, when I will pass through Egypt and strike down the firstborn of both people and animals in that land. I am God. I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. But when I see the blood smeared on your doorposts, I will pass over your houses, so the plague of death will not strike you." So the Israelites did what God had commanded through Moses and Aaron. That night, at midnight, God struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock were struck as well. During the night, Pharaoh and all his officials and all the people of Egypt got up, and there was loud wailing, as someone had died in every house in the land. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron during the night and said, "Get out! Leave! Go, you and all the Israelites! Go and worship the God as you have requested, and take your flocks and herds with you. But give me a blessing before you go." The Egyptians also urged the Israelites to go quickly, because they thought, "Otherwise we will all die." So the Israelites grabbed their dough without yeast, together with their kneading bowls, wrapped in cloaks which they carried on their shoulders. They also did as Moses said, and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and clothes. God made the Egyptians give the Israelites what they asked for. So as they left, the Israelites plundered the Egyptians and stripped them of their wealth. That night, about 600,000 Israelite men, together with their women and children, left Ramesses and travelled on foot to Succoth. There were also many foreigners who went with them, and many flocks and herds. They ate unleavened bread baked from the dough without yeast they carried, because they had rushed out of Egypt and didn't have time to prepare food for the journey. The Israelites had lived in Egypt for 430 years, to the very day when they left. Therefore, because that night God had remembered his promise and brought the Israelites out of Egypt, it must be remembered and celebrated by future generations every year to honour God. When Pharaoh was told that the Israelites had fled, he and his officials changed their minds and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites who served us get away." So Pharaoh had his war chariot prepared and took his army with him to give chase. He took 600 of his best chariots and all the rest of Egypt's chariots with officers in each of them. When the Israelites saw Pharaoh and his army approaching in the distance, they were very frightened and cried out to God for help. They blamed Moses and said to him, "Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die here in the desert? What have you done to us? There were plenty of graves for us in Egypt. Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone'? Now we will all die in the desert. It would have been better for us to be slaves in Egypt than to die out here in the wilderness." But Moses answered, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm. See how God will save you. Stay calm. God himself will fight on your behalf. You will never see these Egyptians again after today." Then God said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell all the Israelites to start moving again. Raise your staff and stretch it out over the water to divide the sea so that the Israelites can cross it on dry ground. Then I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will chase you into the sea. Then my name will be honored and I will be glorified when I defeat Pharaoh, his army, his chariots and horsemen. When I am finished, the Egyptians will all realize that I am God." Then the angel of God, who had been travelling in front of the Israelites, moved behind them together with the pillar of cloud, which had also been in front of them. The cloud formed a protective barrier between the Israelites and Egyptians. The cloud created darkness on the Egyptian side, but there was light on the side of the Israelites. That whole night the Egyptians and Israelites were separated from each other. Moses raised his staff and stretched it out over the sea just as God had commanded. God caused a strong east wind to blow all night long, and the sea was divided. The sea was driven back, and it turned into dry land in the middle. So the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water to their right and a wall of water to their left. The Egyptians chased them right into the middle of the sea, all of Pharaoh's army, his chariots and his horsemen. But when morning came, God looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud, and he caused great confusion in the Egyptian army. Their chariot wheels got stuck in the mud, so they had great difficulty driving their chariots. The Egyptians became concerned and shouted, "God is fighting for the Israelites and against us. Let's get away from them." Then God said to Moses, "Raise your staff and stretch it out over the sea again, so that the waters will come back over the Egyptians, their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched his staff over the sea, and the water returned to its full depth. The Egyptians tried to flee from it, but God swept them into the sea. Their chariots and horsemen, all of Pharaoh's army who had chased the Israelites, were swept away by the returning water. Not one of them survived. When the Israelites saw what God had done to the Egyptians, they put their trust in him and his servant Moses. The sacrificial system, annual atonement for sins. God said to Moses, "Warn your brother Aaron that he is not to enter the most holy place, behind the curtain and in front of the atonement cover on the Ark of the Covenant, whenever he chooses. If he goes in when I am in the cloud over the atonement cover, he will die. Aaron must enter the most holy place just once a year, and this is how he must do it. Firstly, he must offer a young bull as a sin offering and a ram as a burnt offering. Secondly, he must put on linen underwear and his sacred linen tunic, together with a linen sash around his waist and a linen turban on his head. But because these are sacred garments, he must wash his entire body before he puts them on. Thirdly, he must take 2 male goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering from the community of Israel. Aaron must present the young bull as a sin offering to make atonement for the sins of himself and his family. Next, Aaron must present the 2 male goats to me at the entrance of the tabernacle. He must cast sacred lots to choose one goat for me and the other to be the scapegoat that removes sin. Then Aaron must sacrifice the goat chosen for me as a sin offering, and the goat chosen to be the scapegoat must be presented to me by Aaron, then sent away to take the sins of the people into the wilderness. When Aaron sacrifices the first goat as a sin offering for the people, he must bring some of its blood behind the curtain and sprinkle it on and in front of the atonement cover. This is to purify the most holy place from the defiling sin and rebellion of the Israelites. Aaron must also do the same for the rest of the tabernacle. And when he has purified the most holy place, the tabernacle, and the altar, Aaron must lay both his hands on the scapegoat's head and confess over it all the Israelites' sins and rebellion. Their sins will be laid on the head of the goat, which will then be sent out into the wilderness. The goat will carry all the people's sins into the wilderness, led by a man chosen for this task, and he will set it free in a remote place. When Aaron goes back into the tabernacle, he must remove the sacred linen garments he put on to enter the most holy place. Then he must bathe himself with water in the sanctuary area before putting on his regular garments. When Aaron goes out, he must sacrifice the burnt offerings to make atonement for himself and all the people. Finally, when the man who released the scapegoat in the wilderness returns, he must wash his clothes and bathe himself in water before coming into the camp. This is to be a lasting requirement for you. On the 10th day of the 7th month, you and any foreigners residing amongst you must fast and not do any work. For on this day of atonement you will be cleansed from all your sins. It will be a Sabbath day of complete rest. Atonement is to be made once a year to remove all the sins of the Israelites. Coming up next time, we will encounter the God who commands when we look at the third and final part of the story of Moses and the receiving of the 10 Commandments.